The strangest thing about being unwanted is that nobody tells you to leave. They just make sure you never feel at home. The ferry horn echoed across the gray Atlantic as I stood at the bow with one hand wrapped around my coat collar. I watched Martha's Vineyard emerge from the morning mist. The island looked like something from a postcard. White sailboats rocked gently in the harbor. Seagulls drifted overhead. Elegant homes lined the distant shoreline. Everything appeared peaceful, perfect even. But perfection has a way of making people like me feel out of place. I shifted my duffel bag higher on my shoulder and checked my reflection in the dark ferry window. 28 years old, blonde hair pulled back, light makeup, a simple refined navy blue dress. I looked like myself. Unfortunately, myself had never seemed impressive enough for the Moretti family. The moment the ferry docked, I spotted the black SUV waiting near the entrance. Its polished exterior reflected the morning sunlight. Beside it stood Damien Moretti. Even from a distance, he drew attention without trying. 6'3", broad shoulders, dark hair swept neatly back. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room full of powerful people and somehow become the center of gravity. My husband. The man I loved more than I had ever intended to love anyone. His expression softened the moment he saw me. "Claire," he said. He crossed the pavement and wrapped one arm around my shoulders. The familiar scent of cedar and expensive cologne settled around me. Safe, familiar, home. Or at least it usually felt that way. "Long trip?" he asked. "Just enough time to question all my life choices," I replied. A rare smile tugged at his lips. "Good. That means you are mentally prepared for my family." I laughed, but the knot in my stomach remained. Every summer, the entire Moretti family gathered at Moretti Manor. It was a month of family dinners, celebrations, traditions, and carefully hidden rivalries. To outsiders, they looked like American royalty. Wealth, influence, legacy. To me, they looked like a group of people who had spent 3 years politely reminding me I didn't belong. The drive took 20 minutes. When the manor finally appeared atop the cliffs overlooking the ocean, it stole my breath. White stone walls rose above manicured gardens. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the water below. A private lighthouse stood near the edge of the property like a silent guardian. Beyond it stretched the endless Atlantic. Damien squeezed my hand. "Welcome back. Back." The word landed strangely. The front doors opened before we reached them. Family members poured into the grand foyer. Cousins, uncles, aunts, staff carrying luggage. It was the familiar chaos of a wealthy family, pretending not to notice how wealthy they were. Greetings filled the air. Smiles, hugs, polite kisses on cheeks. Everyone was kind. Everyone was welcoming. And somehow, I still felt like a guest. During lunch, I watched conversations flow around the long dining table. Discussions about investments, political fundraisers, yacht renovations, and private foundations. Entire worlds I had never grown up around. I smiled when expected. I contributed when appropriate. I stayed quiet when I couldn't relate. The ocean sparkled beyond the glass windows. Laughter echoed through the room. Yet, a strange loneliness settled over me. Then, something happened. Not a cruel comment, not an insult, just a glance. A brief exchange between two relatives at the far end of the table. A look that lasted less than a second before disappearing. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. Because after 3 years, I had become very good at recognizing the difference between being accepted and being tolerated. That night, the sun disappeared beneath the Atlantic horizon, and golden light flooded the manor's marble halls. I stood alone on the balcony outside our bedroom. Waves crashed softly against the cliffs below. Somewhere inside the house, laughter drifted from the library. Family laughter, the kind that belonged to people who shared history long before I arrived. I stared at the glowing windows and felt something I couldn't quite explain settle deep inside my chest. A quiet feeling, a warning. The kind that whispers before everything changes. The next evening arrived wrapped in golden sunlight and ocean wind. From my bedroom window, I could see sailboats drifting across the water. Down below, staff moved through the gardens preparing for the annual family dinner. Every summer, the Morettis hosted one formal gathering during the first week. It was part celebration, part tradition, and part unspoken competition disguised behind expensive smiles. I spent nearly an hour deciding what to wear, before finally settling on a navy blue dress. It was simple enough to feel like myself, but elegant enough not to stand out for the wrong reasons. When I walked downstairs, the manor already hummed with conversation. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with ocean air drifting through the open terrace doors. Damien stood near the grand staircase, speaking with several relatives. His eyes found mine immediately. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The noise, the people, the doubts. He smiled and extended his hand. I crossed the room and slipped my fingers into his. The gesture felt natural, familiar, like something we had done 1,000 times before. Maybe that was why what happened later hurt so much. Dinner stretched for nearly 3 hours. Stories were shared, toasts were made. Laughter rolled around the table like waves. At one point, Damien's grandmother even complimented the dessert recipe I had taught the kitchen staff last summer. Everyone seemed relaxed, happy, normal. By 10 o'clock, guests began moving into smaller groups throughout the manor. Some gathered in the game room. Others drifted toward the terrace overlooking the ocean. I volunteered to bring coffee to the library after one of Damien's uncles requested another pot. The kitchen staff offered to do it, but I insisted. It gave me an excuse to step away from the crowd for a few minutes. The silver tray felt warm beneath my hands as I walked down the quiet hallway. The library door stood partially open ahead of me. Soft voices drifted through the gap. I recognized Damien's voice instantly. I slowed down, not because I was trying to listen, but only because hearing his voice always pulled my attention. Another male voice answered him, his older brother Vincent. The two of them sounded relaxed, comfortable. Then Vincent laughed softly. "You got lucky with Claire." I smiled before I even reached the doorway. My heart warmed at the unexpected compliment. Then Damien answered, "No, Claire is lucky to be part of this family." The words landed strangely. I stopped walking. Vincent chuckled again. "You really believe that?" he asked. "Look around," Damien replied. "The Moretti name opens doors, opportunities, connections. Most people would consider themselves lucky. Most people." I stared at the silver coffee pot resting on the tray. My reflection warped across its polished surface. Nobody inside the library sounded cruel. Nobody sounded angry. There was no insult, no mocking laughter, no deliberate attempt to hurt me. That was what made it worse. Damien was not performing for anyone. He was speaking honestly, saying exactly what he believed. Vincent said something else, but I barely heard it. The ocean outside pounded softly against the cliffs. Somewhere down the hallway, a clock ticked. I realized I had stopped breathing. 3 years. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of defending his family whenever friends questioned them. 3 years of trying to fit into a world that never felt built for someone like me. And all this time, Damien believed he had given me the gift, not the other way around. My grip tightened around the tray. The cups rattled softly. I stepped backward before either man could notice me standing outside the door. Then I turned and walked away, slowly, quietly, carefully. The coffee remained untouched. The library remained full of warm laughter, and somewhere between that hallway and the staircase, something inside me went completely silent. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, I lay perfectly still beneath the white linen sheets. I listened to the distant sound of waves striking the cliffs below the manor. Usually, mornings here felt peaceful. The ocean, the salt air, the quiet luxury of a house built to impress generations. But that morning, the silence felt different, heavier, somehow. I turned my head toward Damien's side of the bed. It was empty. The faint indentation on the pillow told me he had already been awake for a while. I sat up slowly and wrapped a robe around my shoulders. The room glowed with pale blue light from the Atlantic outside. Everything looked exactly the same as it had the day before. The furniture, the artwork, the flowers on the dresser. Yet something had changed, not around me, but inside me. I found Damien downstairs in the kitchen, speaking with one of the chefs. The moment he saw me, his face brightened. "Good morning," he said. He stepped forward and kissed my forehead. The gesture was familiar, affectionate, real. That almost made it harder. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "I did," I replied. The lie came easier than I expected. His eyes lingered on me for a moment. Then he smiled and returned to discussing breakfast plans for the family. I stood there holding a coffee mug and realized something unsettling. Damien had no idea anything was wrong. Not because he was careless. Not because he did not love me. But because from his perspective, he had done nothing wrong at all. The realization followed me throughout the day. At breakfast during a family walk along the cliffs, and through lunch on the terrace overlooking the ocean. I smiled when expected, participated in conversations, asked questions, and laughed at jokes. The performance felt flawless. Nobody noticed the difference, nobody except me. By mid-afternoon, guests filled the manor again. Family friends arrived from Boston and New York. Staff moved through the halls, carrying trays of drinks and appetizers. Conversations echoed from every room. The entire house seemed alive. Yet, I found myself drifting toward the edges of every gathering. I stood near windows instead of sitting in circles. I was listening more than speaking, and watching instead of participating. At one point, Damien wrapped an arm around my waist as we stood overlooking the ocean. "You have been quiet today," he said. My heart stumbled for half a second. Had he noticed? "Just tired," I said. "Too much family." A teasing smile touched his face. I looked out at the water instead of at him. "Maybe a little," I added. He laughed softly. "Trust me, I grew up with them. It gets easier." Easier. The word lingered long after he walked away to answer a phone call, because the truth was not that his family overwhelmed me. The truth was far more complicated. I knew exactly how to survive among them. Smile, adapt, be gracious, stay useful. The difficult part was realizing that no matter how much effort I invested, I might always be viewed as someone who should feel grateful simply for being allowed through the door. That evening, I found myself standing alone in the manor's greenhouse. Rows of white roses stretched beneath the glass ceiling. The scent filled the warm air. Last summer, I had spent weeks helping restore the neglected space. Every bloom surrounding me existed because I had convinced the gardeners not to remove the dying plants. Funny how nobody remembered that now. Footsteps approached behind me. I recognized them immediately. "Damien, there you are," he said. His voice softened. "I have been looking everywhere." I turned and offered the same smile I had given everyone else all day. Calm, polite, perfect. For a brief moment, confusion crossed his face. Something in his expression shifted, as if he sensed a change he could not explain. Then it vanished. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it. And for the first time since hearing those words outside the library, I realized something truly dangerous. The distance between two people does not begin when they stop loving each other. It begins when one of them starts hiding their pain. People imagine distance as something dramatic, a slammed door, a shouted argument, a goodbye spoken through tears. They never talk about the quieter version, the one that happens so slowly nobody notices, until the space between two people becomes impossible to cross. 3 days passed after our conversation in the greenhouse. 3 days of sunshine, family gatherings, ocean breezes, and carefully maintained smiles. On the surface, everything looked exactly the same. I attended breakfasts. I joined afternoon walks along the cliffs. I sat through long family dinners beneath crystal chandeliers and listened to conversations about investments, politics, charities, and summer plans. Nobody could point to a single thing that was wrong, not even Damien. Yet something subtle had begun to disappear from the manor. Every morning for the past 3 summers, I had arranged fresh flowers in the breakfast room before everyone arrived. Nobody asked me to do it. I simply enjoyed seeing the room come alive before the family gathered. On the 4th morning, I stayed in bed an extra hour. When I finally walked downstairs, the vases sat empty. Several family members glanced at them before sitting down. Nobody mentioned it. Still, I noticed. The next day, I skipped my usual visit to the library. Every summer, I organized the shelves after guests borrowed books and left them scattered throughout the room. By evening, stacks of novels and biographies covered half the tables. Vincent complained jokingly about not being able to find anything. I remained silent. Later that afternoon, Damien found me sitting alone on the eastern terrace overlooking the ocean. The wind tugged at my hair as sailboats drifted across the water below. He settled into the chair beside me and studied my face. "You have been spending a lot of time alone," he noted. I stared toward the horizon. Maybe I needed a little quiet. "Claire," his voice softened. "Are you sure everything is okay?" For one dangerous second, I almost told him. I almost repeated every word I had heard outside that library. I almost asked him whether he truly believed I should spend my life feeling grateful for a seat at his family's table. Instead, I smiled. "I am fine." The answer seemed to satisfy him less than before. His gaze lingered another moment before his phone rang. A business call. Within seconds, he was walking away. I watched him disappear through the terrace doors. The ocean stretched endlessly before me. For the first time in years, I wondered what my life would look like if I stopped trying so hard. That evening, a family movie night filled the manor screening room. Usually, I coordinated everything: blankets, snacks, seating arrangements. The little details nobody noticed until they were missing. This time I did nothing. An hour before the movie started, confusion spread through the house. Staff searched for supplies. Children complained about missing popcorn. Adults argued over seating. Small inconveniences. Nothing important. Yet somehow the evening felt disorganized, uncomfortable, incomplete. I sat quietly in the back row and watched it unfold. Not with satisfaction, not with bitterness, only with a strange sadness. Because none of them realized what they were actually missing. It was never the flowers, or the books, or the movie nights. It was the care behind them. The invisible effort that had quietly held pieces of this family together. The next morning brought an unexpected surprise. Damien's grandmother, Eleanor Moretti, arrived earlier than usual for breakfast. At 82 years old, she missed very little. Her blue eyes swept across the room before settling on me. She looked at the empty flower arrangements, then at the untouched piano in the corner, then at me. A small crease formed between her brows. During breakfast, she watched me more than once. Not openly, not enough for others to notice, but I noticed. After all, I had spent years learning how to read this family, and something in Eleanor's expression told me she had begun reading me back. When breakfast ended, she rose slowly from her chair and paused beside me. Her voice was gentle. "Claire, dear, walk with me later." I looked up, surprised. Eleanor rarely asked anyone for anything. Her gaze remained fixed on mine for a second longer than necessary. Then she smiled and continued toward the door. Around me, conversations resumed. Coffee cups clinked softly. Sunlight spilled through the windows. Life at Moretti Manor carried on, as though nothing had changed. But for the first time since that night outside the library, someone had finally noticed the silence. Later that afternoon, I found Eleanor waiting exactly where she said she would be. The old stone gazebo stood near the edge of the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic, surrounded by white roses swaying in the summer breeze. She sat with perfect posture despite her age, a cup of tea resting beside her. The moment I approached, she gestured toward the empty chair across from her. "Sit," she said. I obeyed. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The ocean stretched endlessly below. Waves rolled against the rocks. Somewhere in the distance, a boat horn echoed through the afternoon air. Finally, Eleanor set down her cup. "You stopped caring for the roses." The statement caught me off guard, not because it was wrong, but because it was the last thing I expected her to notice. "The gardeners can handle them," I said softly. "That is not what I asked," she replied. Her blue eyes remained fixed on mine, sharp, unwavering. "You stopped caring for them." I looked away first. The silence stretched between us. Then she sighed. "Do you know what surprises me most about this family?" she asked. I shook my head. "They think power is the reason people stay." The wind lifted a strand of her silver hair. They always have. Something about her tone made my chest tighten. "And what is the real reason?" I asked quietly. A faint smile touched her lips. "People stay because someone makes them feel valued." My throat suddenly felt too tight. Eleanor glanced toward the manor, rising above the cliffs. "The flowers appeared every morning because of you. The library stayed organized because of you. Half the family traditions these children enjoy exist because of you." She paused. Nobody notices what holds their world together until it disappears. For the first time in days, I felt tears threaten. I blinked them away before they could fall. Eleanor pretended not to notice. That evening, her words followed me back to the manor. At dinner, the atmosphere felt different. Small frustrations surfaced everywhere. A cousin complained about a missing birthday slideshow. An uncle searched for information about a charity event nobody had organized. Two children argued because the weekly scavenger hunt had never been scheduled. Usually those things happened automatically. Usually I handled them quietly before anyone realized they needed handling. Damien sat across from me, watching the conversation unfold. More than once his gaze drifted toward me. Thoughtful, curious, confused. By dessert, even Vincent looked irritated. "This summer feels disorganized," he muttered. "Everything feels off." Several family members nodded in agreement. I focused on my coffee. Nobody connected the missing pieces. Nobody yet. After dinner, Damien found me standing near the lighthouse path overlooking the ocean. The setting sun painted the water gold and orange. He slipped his hands into his pockets and stood beside me. "Can I ask you something?" he asked. "Of course," I replied. "Are you unhappy here?" The question hit harder than I expected. I studied the waves below. "Why would you ask that?" "Because something changed." His voice was careful now. "I cannot explain it, but I feel it." For a moment, hope flickered inside me. Maybe he truly saw me. Maybe he was finally looking beyond the surface. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Another call. Another responsibility. Another demand on his attention. The moment vanished. "Sorry," he said. He stepped back. "We will talk later." I watched him walk away toward the manor. The distance between us felt larger than the length of the cliffside path. Behind him, lights began illuminating the windows of Moretti Manor. Ahead of me, the ocean stretched toward the horizon. And for the first time since arriving on the island, I found myself wondering a question I had never allowed before. If I stopped holding this family together completely, how long would it take them to realize what they had lost? The truth arrived on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. No dramatic confession, no secret recording, no carefully planned confrontation. Just a simple mistake that changed everything. Rain tapped softly against the manor windows, while most of the family gathered in the sunroom overlooking the ocean. The weather had forced everyone indoors, and for the first time all week, the house felt unusually quiet. I sat near the fireplace, helping one of Damien's younger cousins sort photographs for a family history project. Across the room, conversations drifted between investment plans, vacation schedules, and upcoming charity events. Then one of the housekeepers entered carrying fresh towels. She was new, hired only a few months earlier. She was still unfamiliar with the complicated social landscape of the Moretti family. She smiled when she saw me. "Mrs. Moretti, I wanted to thank you." I looked up surprised. "For what?" I asked. "For everything you did before." The room remained busy around us. Nobody paid much attention at first. "I am not sure what you mean," I replied. Her smile widened. "When my daughter was applying to college. The recommendation letter, the scholarship contacts, the tutoring program." I blinked. "That was a long time ago. It changed her life." Emotion softened her voice. "She graduates next spring." Before I could respond, another staff member overheard the conversation. "Mrs. Moretti helped my son, too." Heads began turning. Conversation slowed. The second woman smiled warmly. "When my husband lost his job, she connected him with a contractor on the mainland. He has been working ever since." Silence spread gradually through the room. Not uncomfortable silence, but curious silence. One by one, stories emerged. The groundskeeper mentioned how I had organized a fundraiser after storm damage affected several local families. A cook remembered how I had arranged medical assistance for her elderly mother. Someone else mentioned holiday gifts, quietly purchased for staff children when parents were struggling. I sat frozen as voices filled the room. Things I had never discussed, things I never expected anyone to mention. Across the room, Damien slowly lowered the document he had been reading. His expression changed with every story. Confusion first, then surprise, then something deeper, something harder to identify. Eleanor watched him carefully. She said nothing. She did not need to. More stories followed. Family members began contributing memories of their own. A cousin recalled that I had planned every birthday celebration for 3 consecutive summers. An aunt remembered that I had personally coordinated care during her illness 2 years earlier. Vincent frowned. "Why am I hearing about half of this for the first time?" he asked. Nobody answered, because there was no answer. Most kindness happens quietly. That is what makes it easy to overlook. The final blow came from Eleanor herself. She set down her teacup and spoke without raising her voice. Because Claire never needed an audience. The room went completely still. Her gaze settled on Damien. She spent years giving this family her time, her attention, and her heart. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The question is not whether she was lucky to join this family. My pulse stopped. For a moment I could not breathe. Damien's face lost all color. Eleanor continued softly. "The question is whether this family was wise enough to appreciate what joined it." The rain continued tapping against the windows. Somewhere deep inside the manor, a grandfather clock chimed the hour. Nobody spoke, not after that, because suddenly everyone seemed to be remembering things. Small moments, quiet gestures, invisible contributions. The countless threads that had connected people without demanding recognition. I looked down at the photographs scattered across my lap. My hands trembled slightly. Across the room, Damien stared at me, not with confusion anymore, not with curiosity, with realization. A terrible realization. Because for the first time, he was seeing the full picture, and somewhere behind his eyes, I watched the memory surface. A library, a conversation, a sentence he once spoke without thinking. The exact moment everything began to change. When our eyes met, I knew he remembered it too. The house felt different after that afternoon. Not louder, not quieter, just aware. As though Moretti Manor itself had finally opened its eyes. For the rest of the evening, conversations followed me wherever I went. Relatives who had barely noticed me for years suddenly remembered stories. Staff members smiled a little longer. People thanked me for things I had never expected anyone to mention. It should have made me happy. Instead, it made me tired. Because appreciation that arrives only after absence has already begun rarely feels the same. That night, I stood alone in our bedroom, watching moonlight spill across the ocean beyond the windows. The water shimmered silver beneath the stars. Somewhere downstairs, distant laughter echoed through the halls. I should have felt relieved, seen, understood. Yet all I felt was exhaustion. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Before I could answer, the door opened. Damien stepped inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us. Different from before. Honest now. His hands remained in his pockets. His expression was unreadable. Claire. My name sounded fragile in his voice. I turned back toward the window. It is late, I said. I know, he replied. Another silence followed. I could feel him searching for words. The same man who negotiated million-dollar deals without hesitation suddenly seemed unable to form a sentence. You heard me. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not a question. Not anymore. Yes, I answered. The room became perfectly still. Even the ocean seemed quieter. How long, he asked, since the night in the library. A sharp breath escaped him. I did not need to look to know the guilt had landed. I could hear it, feel it. Claire, I did not mean it. He started. I know. My answer stopped him. Slowly, I turned around. That is what hurt. Confusion flashed across his face. What do you mean? You were not angry, I explained. You were not trying to hurt me. My voice remained calm. Too calm. You were simply telling the truth. The words seemed to strike harder than any accusation. Damien looked away first. For years, I had imagined what this conversation might sound like if it ever happened. I thought there would be tears, anger, raised voices. Instead, there was only sadness. Quiet and impossible to escape. Claire, I never believed you were less than me. Maybe not, I said. I picked up the small leather journal resting on the dresser. But you believed your family was something I should feel lucky to deserve. His face tightened. That is not what I meant. Then what did you mean? I asked. For the first time, he had no answer. Because the problem with careless truths is that they often reveal things we never intended to say aloud. I looked at the journal in my hands. Earlier that afternoon, I had spent hours writing inside it. Memories, thoughts, feelings I could no longer carry alone. I am leaving tomorrow. The words fell gently into the room. Damien froze completely. What? I booked a ferry for the morning. No. The response came instantly. Not angry, not commanding. Desperate. I had never heard desperation in Damien's voice before. Claire, do not do this. My heart cracked a little hearing it, because part of me still loved him deeply. But love and self-respect are not the same thing. I need time. His eyes dropped to the journal in my hands. What is that? A letter? The color drained from his face. For me? I nodded once. He stared at it as though it weighed 1,000 pounds. Outside, waves crashed against the cliffs below the manor. Inside, neither of us moved. Then Damien whispered something that frightened me, more than anything else he had said all week. I think I am already too late. The ferry terminal was already busy when I arrived the next morning. Seagulls circled overhead. Salt air drifted across the docks. Travelers rolled suitcases toward boarding gates, while crew members prepared the vessel for departure. I stood near the water, holding my duffel bag in one hand and the railing with the other. The Atlantic stretched endlessly ahead, gray beneath the early morning sky. For the first time in years, I had no plan beyond leaving. Strange how freedom and heartbreak can feel so similar. My phone remained silent in my pocket. Part of me expected a message from Damien. Another part feared one. The letter sat safely inside his hands now. Every truth I could not say out loud lived within those pages. The hurt, the disappointment, the loneliness of spending years earning a place that should have already been mine. A ferry horn sounded across the harbor. Boarding would begin soon. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves. Then I heard footsteps running. Fast, determined, familiar. My eyes opened. Damien was moving through the crowd toward me. His dark coat hung open. His hair was windblown. For once, the perfectly controlled man I knew looked completely undone. People stepped aside as he passed. He stopped several feet away, breathing harder than I had ever seen. Neither of us spoke immediately. The ocean crashed softly against the docks below. Finally, he held up the journal. My journal. The pages looked worn now. Read. Understood. I finished it, he said. His voice was rough. I nodded. Then you know why I had to leave. He looked down at the journal before meeting my eyes again. I know why you wanted to. Something in his expression made my chest tighten. There was no pride left there. No certainty. No assumption that he could simply fix everything with a few words. Only regret. Honest regret. Claire, I spent all night reading. He swallowed hard. Every page hurt. I looked away toward the water. Good. The answer escaped before I could stop it. Damien flinched. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. You wrote about birthdays I forgot you planned. Family traditions I thought happened on their own. Problems you solved before anyone knew they existed. He shook his head slowly. Do you know what frightened me most? I remained silent. You never once asked for credit. The ferry horn sounded again. Louder this time. Boarding had begun. Passengers started moving toward the gate. My heart pounded. Damien glanced toward the line forming behind me, then back at me. For years, I thought I was giving you a life. His voice broke slightly. I never realized you were giving one to all of us. Emotion tightened my throat. The crowd continued moving around us. Announcements echoed through speakers. A child laughed somewhere nearby. Life carried on while my world stood completely still. Damien stepped closer. Not enough to pressure me, just enough to be heard. I am not asking you to forgive me today. His eyes never left mine. I am asking you not to disappear before I have a chance to become the man you deserved from the beginning. The boarding line continued moving. One choice waited behind me. Another stood in front of me. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then my gaze drifted past Damien's shoulder, down the dock toward the parking area. Every member of the Moretti family stood there. Eleanor, Vincent, cousins, aunts, uncles, even members of the staff. They had all come. And for the first time since arriving on the island, nobody looked at me like I was a guest. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The wind moved across the harbor. Ferry workers called instructions from the dock. Passengers continued boarding behind me, yet all I could see were the faces standing beyond Damien, faces that looked different now. Not because they had changed overnight, because for the first time, they were no longer looking through me. Eleanor stepped forward first. The crowd parted naturally around her. Her silver hair moved gently in the ocean breeze as she approached. Claire. Her voice carried the same quiet strength it always had. You once asked me why families survive. I remembered the conversation in the gazebo, the roses, the cliffs, the sadness I had been trying so hard to hide. Eleanor smiled softly. The answer was never power. Her gaze shifted toward the gathered relatives behind her. It was people willing to love when it would have been easier not to. My eyes burned. Nearby, Vincent cleared his throat. The confident man who always seemed to have an answer suddenly looked uncomfortable. I owe you an apology. The word surprised everyone, including him. He gave a short laugh. Honestly, I probably owe you 100. A few family members smiled through their emotions. Vincent shook his head. For years, I thought these traditions existed because they always had. He looked directly at me. I never stopped to ask who was carrying them. One by one, others stepped forward, not with grand speeches, not with dramatic promises, just honest gratitude. A cousin thanked me for helping her through a difficult year. An aunt thanked me for showing up when nobody else noticed she was struggling. Staff members smiled through tears. Small stories filled the air. Quiet stories, human stories, the kind that matter most. Damien remained beside me through all of it, silent, listening, learning. When the voices finally faded, he stepped forward. The harbor seemed to disappear. The crowd, the ferry, the ocean, everything narrowed to the man standing in front of me. He took a slow breath. For most of my life, People treated the Moretti name like it was something special. His voice remained steady. I believed it too. No one interrupted. I thought legacy came from wealth, influence, success. His eyes met mine. Then you walked into our lives. Emotion tightened my chest. Damien looked toward his family, then back at me. I spent years believing I gave Claire a family. His voice softened. The truth is that she gave one to us. Silence followed. Deep, powerful, real. Several relatives lowered their eyes. Others nodded slowly, because everyone knew it was true. Damien took another step closer. You do not owe this family gratitude. His voice almost broke. We owe it to you. Tears blurred my vision. Not because the pain disappeared. Not because everything was magically fixed. Healing does not happen that way. Trust does not return in a single moment. But something important had happened. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. The ferry horn sounded again. Final boarding, last call. I looked toward the vessel waiting at the dock, then toward the family standing before me. My family, imperfect, complicated, sometimes blind, sometimes stubborn, but finally willing to see. Slowly, I released the handle of my duffel bag. Damien noticed first. Hope flickered across his face. Careful hope, the kind that understood second chances are gifts, not guarantees. I smiled through tears. Small, fragile, real. Around us, the ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Waves rolled against the shore. Seagulls drifted overhead beneath the morning sun. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. Yet somehow everything felt different. Because power can build a dynasty, wealth can build an empire, but neither can create a home. Only love can do that. And for the first time in a very long time, Moretti Manor finally felt like mine.